I'm Tracy Herman. I'm the Community Director for the Western Region for Commerce Next, which is a community and event series and conference for marketers within retail and D2C brands. Today's webinar is on Tariff Turbulence, Smart Retail Strategy in Uncertain Times. This is a much anticipated topic that we're looking forward to discussing today with our panel and the great lineup of guest speakers, including Sucharita Kodali, VP and Principal Analyst at Forrester Research, Michael Gunther, our Head of Insights at Consumer Edge, Matt Krieger, SVP Digital Commerce at Buffalo Games, and AJ Patel, SVP of Global Growth UBeauty. Please note we'll be taking your questions, so feel free to load them up during the presentation. But first, I want to make a couple of announcements. First, thanks to our amazing sponsor, Consumer Edge, for making today's webinar possible. And I also want to thank our awesome team at Commerce Next, which includes Veronica, Scott, Jenny, Corey, and Rob, who are behind the scenes helping to make this webinar a success. Next, I want to make sure you guys mark your calendars for our growth show. It's this month. It's coming up June 24th to the 26th in New York City. It's a must-attend event for the summer for retail professionals. You'll get insights from our industry leaders, explore latest innovations, connect with peers. We have some amazing speakers lined up this year from Ulta, Vuori, Sam's Club, American Eagle, and many more. We're only 3 weeks away, so make sure you don't miss your chance to join us. On the next slide, I want to show you that we have an opportunity to register to win 2 Broadway tickets. It's another reason to join. You can also choose any Broadway show of your choice, and we're hosting that giveaway to help make that experience even better while you join us in New York City for our growth show. You can select from Hamilton to Wicked to Lion King and really just experience the magic of Broadway, making it an unforgettable experience. So you can go ahead and click the registration link. Corey, if you can go ahead and provide that link in the chat, you'll be automatically entered into the giveaway once you register. On our next slide, I just want to point out that if you miss any of our previous webinars, you can find them on our YouTube channel, and it's listed also on the right-hand side of this column. You can see in the slide here. And then next, I want to just go through the agenda very briefly. We're first going to present on tariff uncertainty. Thanks again, everyone, for joining. We'll also then follow up with audience polls and then lead into our discussion. Next, just a couple of housekeeping notes. Don't worry about missing anything. We are making a recording of this webinar. We'll make it available for you tomorrow. And also, we want to just make sure you guys understand and review the webinar platform functionality. So on the next slide, you'll see in the upper right-hand corner in big marker, you'll see that we have 4 tabs. From left to right, there's chat, Q&A, polls, and handouts. Next, in the chat tab, when you want to communicate with other attendees or any other audience members, or even just shout out to our speakers, you can do so in that chat button up at the top. Then next, within the polls, it's pretty straightforward, but when you want to participate in our live audience polls, we'll go ahead and review final results after we review the questions and then also close out the polls. And then finally, you'll see in our handouts tab, we do have handouts available for you today during the presentation and other useful information that we can make available for you via download. And then also one of our favorite tools is the Q&A tab. We encourage you to be an active part of the webinar, especially given the topic. Again, we're a community here, so if you have any burning questions, just drop them into the Q&A. I'll read them out to our panelists. Worth noting, you can also upvote audience questions. This really helps with our engagement, and it also helps us prioritize any questions that you have to ask to the panel. And then next, if you are watching the replay, you can find the handouts in the bottom of your player. You can see at the very bottom, we have it highlighted here. If you want to see that replay, you can see that bottom icon. All right, now leading up to our first presentation, I'm excited to introduce to the audience Sucharita Kodali. She is the VP and Principal Analyst at Forrester Research. Sucharita, can you please take it away?
Hi, everyone. Always great to be on Commerce Next events. Love the Commerce Next community and always enjoy the opportunity to connect with the audience here. So thank you for having me. So just for those of you who don't know Forrester is a technology research company. It's headquartered in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I've been a homeworker for the 18 years I've been at Forrester, but we do lots of surveys, forecasts, and essentially vendor evaluations too. So to start with the question of what's going on with tariffs, I think that really this is probably the overarching question that many of you probably have, which is how much of this is really political theater? Or is this something that is going to be here to stay? And if so, what is really going to be the impact that it will have? And no doubt some of the drama and the sense that this is theatrical is largely tied to the fact that almost every day the news seems to be changing. It's either the numbers are up or down or high or low, or the courts have said it's okay, the courts have said it's not okay. So there's just a lot of uncertainty, and that uncertainty is causing virtually every publicly traded retailer to have to either to lower their guidance for the rest of the year, or to just basically say, we just don't know. So we can't predict and we can't promise that we're going to have the great numbers in the future that we've been having to date, even though retail continues to be at an all-time high. What I hope to share with you today, and what I really hope you get out of this, at least, well, the broader part of the entire panel, is insight and hopefully also some guidance on primary source documents that you can go to get your own information. A large part of the reason why it's so important to get some of that primary source information is that there, especially in the day of social media, there's so much misinformation. There is so much where there's speculation on top of speculation, and much of that speculation is not even grounded in any type of reality or truth, and that is problematic. So one of the questions, of course, is the belief, particularly because of all the lawsuits that have been filed. Does the president even have the ability to invoke these tariffs that have been happening? And there was a congressional research report that I would encourage everybody to download. And it says that, in fact, there are quite a few precedents that do, in fact, allow it. Whether or not Congress is going to allow those precedents to continue remains to be seen, particularly as next year we're headed into an election year where either the House or the Senate or both may turn. You also have many of these court cases potentially going up to the Supreme Court. And the word on the street, conventional wisdom, is that 5 of those Supreme Court justices may be inclined to changing some of those precedents and potentially a landmark ruling. So there's just a lot of uncertainty, but certainly, there's still no clarity on that part of it. But all of that said, I think that, and whether or not ultimately tariffs are even the end goal here, there is, I think, a lot of misinformation. And there are a couple of myths in particular that I do want to spend a few minutes dispelling. The first is that everything with tariffs right now has no plan. And I think that is probably the first thing that we want to, kind of step back and understand what is some of potentially the literature, or what has actually been written here that gets us to where we are today. Because the truth is that while some of the execution, much of the execution may have been chaotic and constantly seems to change from day to day, there is in fact a plan. And one of the documents that I encourage everybody to go and read and download, it's, if you Google this, you can easily find it. It is a document that's kind of informally known as the Mar-a-Lago Accord. That's not actually a thing, but it is essentially the blueprint for the plan that we have laid out now. The reason this is important is that it was written back in November by an economist named Stephen Moran, who is currently the chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors. That means that he is one of the top economists right now in the White House, and he essentially drafted what is this plan and this idea of imposing global tariffs, much of which is ultimately about negotiating better deals with other countries. Now, I'm going to summarize for you essentially what this document says in this slide, and I'm going to cut to the chase and try to kind of synthesize it as succinctly as possible. And really where it starts is that there is a belief that the US dollar has been too strong. And as a result of its strength, it essentially has led to inelastic demand, which means that regardless of the value of the dollar versus other currencies, regardless of what is happening in the global economy, every country has been using the US dollar as a reserve currency, which has propped up the value of the US dollar. That's led to two major consequences. One is that it is too expensive to have any manufacturing in the United States. And we're going to talk about that as like another myth. And then the second is that we end up, ever since essentially the end of World War II, the United States has been the world's policeman. And that was fine in an era when the US had an enormous lead over every other nation in the world. But as China in particular has caught up, it makes it much more expensive for the United States to be in that role where such a significant part of our federal budget goes to the military. So the question is really, can the tariffs potentially encourage other countries to increase their military spending and defray some of the U.S.'s expense? This is not new. This is part of the reason that there was a lot of talk, even since 2016, to pull back U.S. support of NATO. Now, I want to go back to this weakened manufacturing point, because there is a myth out there. This brings me to the second myth related to tariffs, that the tariffs are intended to repatriate all manufacturing back to the United States. That is not true, because there is not any move to bring categories like t-shirt manufacturing or widget manufacturing back to the United States. If you look at the April 2nd executive order, again, would encourage everybody to take a look at that. It actually outlines very specific industries that the government is hoping to bring back. And a lot of them have either intellectual property reasons or defense reasons to come back to the US. It's things like semiconductors, defense manufacturing, transportation, and large heavy manufacturing like shipbuilding. And this announcement from NVIDIA is actually probably the poster child of the type of manufacturing that the US would like to bring back. Now, the question is also then, well, what is the point of the tariffs, and kind of how significant of an impact could it have? And this is largely where I do wonder how much of it is political theater. When you look at every economic analysis across a variety of investment banks, international agencies, economic groups, every single one of them says that the impact of tariffs will be negative to the US GDP. And these are actually, and that's what all the red marks in the third column are. And these are even with the relatively conservative estimates of what those tariffs would be, whether it's like a 10% global number with a 60% tariff on China. As you've heard in the media, many of these numbers that have been announced or are speculated by the U.S. are even higher. The red column is not really, it's pretty terrible. It would be pretty terrible news for the U.S. economy, basically pushing the U.S. into likely a recession. Now, given that, my hunch is that it is no economic no economist, no administration is really going to want to have a policy that's going to ultimately willingly lead a country into a recession, which leads me to believe that much of this is to get some of these other actions in place with the hope that there would be some of those concessions, either in the form of kind of changes to currency, or potentially even foreign governments bringing other types of manufacturing into the United States, outright, kind of support for the U.S. debt, and kind of reductions of some of the U.S.'s own debt payments. So there are any number of things that can be talked about, that are on the table. And even if we have this discussion of tariffs that continues for the coming months, even after that, there are any number of things that are even within that Mar-a-Lago Accord document that were referenced that will likely be in the news for probably the better part of the Trump administration. Everything from changes to how how essentially bonds are issued. There's talk about kind of extending U.S. bonds from 30 to 100 years, the creation of a sovereign wealth fund. So other ways that countries can bring things to the table that could potentially improve the trade balance between the U.S. and other regions of the world. So I think really those are the questions. Now, all that said, in the near term, we have tons of uncertainty with retailers. And what we do hear from retailers is that they are doing their best to try to adjust to the uncertainty in the economic landscape. So we have everything from companies trying to forward purchase, which is, so long as they have cash, they're able to do. They are diversifying and moving some of their manufacturing away from China. They're trying to maintain the talent that they have by trying to keep everybody as calm as possible. But the point that worries me the most of what companies are in fact doing is they are testing the elasticity of their different products. In fact, they're going back and looking historically at which products are the most elastic or inelastic, and then raising prices where they can, or if they're not explicitly, they're planning to raise prices. And what worries me the most about that is that if prices are raised, we essentially go off into another round of triggering inflation. Right now, inflation is just north of 2%, and that's close to that magic number that the Fed likes to see. Because as soon as you get to that level, there is the hope that rate cuts will happen. But so long as the numbers are higher than that 2%, we likely won't see any rate cuts. And you may spook the markets. And the last time we had severe levels of inflation, we saw pretty drastic sell-offs in the market. Now, it doesn't appear that we're headed in that direction just yet. And, we had the worst days in April where it wasn't quite as bad, where it actually wasn't anywhere nearly as bad as the days during the inflation drop a few years ago. And it seems like we are, kind of potentially even past that. But if inflation does become an issue again, we may very well see another drop in the market, which is entirely very possible. And the future could be shaped in any one of these following letters. These are the things that we definitely saw during the pandemic as well. You may recall talk about whether or not the drop in March 2020 was going to be a U or a V or a W-shaped recovery. And I think that a lot of that is back in the picture now, where right now it appears to be a V-shaped recovery, but we don't know if it's going to fall again. And if it falls again, we don't know if it'll be lateral or if it will recover. And if it recovers, will it recover slowly or it will recover quickly? What we do know is that there are a number of sectors that are going to be absolutely facing a tremendous amount of uncertainty, in large part due to questions around inflation, questions around supply chain, and just questions in general around how consumers are ultimately spending. And even in light of that, and even as we talk about tariffs, there are other issues as well that are clouding our landscape. We still have supply chain issues. You may or may not even have heard that there are still to this day issues shipping through the Suez Canal, in large part due to geopolitical constraints. And these are factors that affect absolutely the cost and the timeliness, the availability of goods that are coming from the Far East to Europe, as an example. We have consumer sentiment still being at record lows. And this is something that has been some of the cognitive dissonance that we've seen, not only more recently, but we've seen for the last several years, where consumer sentiment has been low, in spite of the fact that some of the macro indicators of consumers actually purchasing pretty substantially in retail and other macro indicators like unemployment rates, or the U.S. unemployment rate being relatively high, wages being relatively low, the unemployment rate being relatively low, wages being relatively high, and GDP growth still being positive and relatively strong on a year-over-year basis. There are other things, though, that are also clouding the landscape. There's something you may have heard of called the doomsday clock. This is actually a measure, a sort of an unofficial measure by some atomic scientists. It was actually created by Oppenheimer and Einstein decades ago. And these atomic scientists think that we're actually closer to doomsday now than we have been, and doomsday being essentially a human catastrophe that would probably be really, really bad for planet Earth. But this is the closest we've come to doomsday since the end of World War II. And that is not due to tariffs. It is due to everything from climate change to AI, and the lack of regulation around AI to nuclear war and the threat potentially of nuclear weapons being deployed due to some of the geopolitical strife around the world. So what I'm going to leave as just a final parting thought, and then we'll have kind of the panel weigh in, is now more than ever, especially with the uncertainty, retailers, particularly small retailers, need to step up and lobby wherever possible. Talk to your congressman, and also be wary of one-way doors. Do not do something that's so drastic, like, for instance, changing manufacturing altogether, if you don't yet know what the future holds. That could just be risky and something that may not ultimately be a worthwhile investment, particularly as we talk about some of those manufacturing points where a lot of the talk of bringing manufacturing for the United States is in sectors that aren't necessarily retail consumer goods. Aside from lobbying, I encourage everybody to have a political voice during the primaries, not just at general elections. People always forget about the primaries, and the primaries are where there's the least amount of voter participation and often where there is the biggest decisions that are often made for things like the U.S. House. AI could enable efficiencies, particularly we're hearing a lot about agentic AI these days, and that may be something that in an environment, if you are in a highly constrained cost environment, agentic may be able to reduce some of your cost of operations. More than half of retail is now transacted, more than half of e-commerce, I should say, is transacted on mobile devices, and people really haven't upgraded their mobile experiences since 2010. So it may be time to revisit some of your conversion rates on mobile devices, which I will probably guarantee are lower than your desktop conversion rates. There are new platforms like Whatnot that can enable things like live shopping. We've been talking about live shopping for years now. Just be wary of giving too much, either in the way of information or resources to third-party platforms. And I do want to leave you on a positive note that we have been through uncertainty before as a retail industry, and that was truly during the pandemic. And I think some of the best lessons about moving quickly and embracing automation applied then, and they potentially apply now too. Just a parting anecdote here. Many of you probably know this company. It is one of America's oldest companies. It is America's oldest brewer, Yuengling. And one of the things that I just want to point out is that it's nearly a 200-year-old company. And at the 90-year mark, they faced a pretty major crisis. That crisis was prohibition. They faced a constitutional amendment banning the sale of their product. And I just want everyone to remember here that no matter how bad you may think public policy is not in your favor right now, you do not have a constitutional amendment banning the sale of your product. What they actually did during this difficult time was that they took stock of the assets they had. And one of their assets was caves. They had these dark, cold caves where they could store beer because they started the company in the era before refrigeration. They used those caves during Prohibition to create a completely new product for sale. That product was ice cream. And that launched America's love affair with ice cream and the period of inflection of growth and adoption of ice cream in the United States actually started around the time of Prohibition. So for those 13 years, that is what this Prohibition, that's what this company did to stay alive. It was a massive pivot, and it was one that essentially kept them alive during a difficult time. So I just want to highlight the importance of creativity and taking stock of the assets that you have and thinking about how you can navigate an otherwise very difficult period. So with that, I am going to give the mic back to Tracy. This is my contact information if anyone wants these slides.
Thanks, Sucharita. And that is so much to unpack and learn. I love that there is a positive spin. You can turn it into something literally sweet. Unpack and learn. I love that. Sorry, there's a repeat on my laptop next to me. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce to you Michael. Michael Gunther, the head of insights over at Consumer Edge. You can go ahead and also see Consumer Insights at or Consumer Edge at our upcoming growth show. They'll be hosting, I believe we'll send you the details, Corey. We can drop in the day that they have a talk and a roundtable. Go ahead and take it away, Michael.
Thanks, Tracy. And to Sucharita's point, there are so many conflicting signals in the news regarding consumer confidence, from conference calls at major retailers, including information that indicates price increases, that indicates pricing remaining steady, even if they're facing higher costs. So what I'm excited to share with you today is hard data to show you how consumer purchase trends are evolving in the face of all this news and in the face of potentially higher costs. So this is our first time presenting at one of these events. So I just wanted to share a little bit about Consumer Edge. So we are really well known for providing accurate, timely consumer purchase information. One of the main focuses of today is going to be our consumer credit and debit card data, which we have in the US, the UK, and continental Europe. We track millions and millions of these cards and payment accounts, tens of thousands of public and private brands across hundreds of thousands of store locations. And we're able to glean insight into what's happening online and in store. And we're also able to provide insight into what's happening and within different geographies, even within the United States, and among different demographic groups, which is particularly important right now, given what pressure the low-income consumer is under. Next slide. Great. So a little bit more about the use cases that I think you'll find valuable in data like this. So you're able to track competitive intelligence into what's happening across tons of different industries. Think about anything that a credit or debit card touches. So everything from specialty retail in the mall, to autos, to online retail, to beauty, all of that is tracked here, and you can monitor what's happening with brands of all sizes across the board. You're able to see spending trends, average order value shifts, all the way down to 3-digit zip code. So we're really able to tease out where shifts are happening on a much more micro level, in addition to the macro level where we monitor overall spending, industries and sub-industries, and how those wallet shifts are occurring. Next slide. And we are widely trusted in the media to provide these consumer insights. Just recently, we were featured on CNN in a video discussing one of the slides that's coming up next regarding the impact of Temu and Shein's decline on the rest of retail. So happy to be trusted by these top-tier publications, and I'm going to share some of those insights with you today. Okay, so now we're going to start diving into the hard data. And I think this is incredibly interesting because we saw a notable shift in spending behavior right after Liberation Day. So let's go to that first chart. So this is just one example, and it is so clear. We're showing a basket of airline stocks here, where you are able to see booking trends through these credit and debit cards. And you can see that growth in bookings took a notable step down. And by the way, they continued to decelerate much more than this right after that initial announcement. So you can see in that circled box, that was April 2nd, there was a really notable downtick in bookings growth. Consumers responded. They decided to be more conservative because they didn't know what to expect. They didn't know how much their wallets might be stretched by increased costs of everyday items. So they pulled back. They maybe deferred trips. And by the way, we saw the same thing among hotels, event ticket sales, so high-priced concerts and things like that. And this is against a backdrop where even before this tariff announcement, earlier in the year, we were seeing a broad-based slowing of growth across apparel, accessories, and footwear, luxury, beauty. All those discretionary categories were sort of softening a little bit. And then this announcement happened, and you saw an immediate response among consumers. Similarly, in addition to pulling back on discretionary categories, immediately following that announcement, we were able to observe, using this consumer purchase data, stock up behavior among consumers. So, responding to the news, consumers went to Walmart and Target and other stores, as they normally do, and they were increasing the number of items in their basket relative to what they would normally do. You see a notable uptick in items per transaction in this data, indicating that they wanted to load up on things, particularly ones that you can put in your pantry, ahead of any sort of price increases that might have come. So there was not really a wait and see. There was a let me protect my bank account by loading up on these items that aren't going to go bad in order to manage any price increases that are coming later. And that's why you saw this big increase immediately after that. And then using another data set, we were able to track even more than what we were showing in the prior chart, which was focusing on consumer packaged goods, those really non-discretionary items, those everyday items that people need. And so in this particular chart, we're looking across a different set of retailers, Amazon, BJ's, Costco, and Target. And this data covers everything that is sold at those different merchants, online and offline. And here we're using a measure called average transaction size, which is a really good proxy that tracks very well with CPI of pricing. It is a mix of pricing and basket size, but it really does have a very strong relationship with that. So you're able to see, even before prices went up, the amount that people spent per transaction at these retailers took a notable step up. You can see how all those bars started rising a lot more in the days following. Now, in the couple weeks after that, that did subside a little bit, although we're seeing some new evidence of this in recent weeks. But the point is, consumers are not sitting idle. They react to these headlines. And now diving in a little deeper into a more specific example of how these trade tensions have impacted specific companies. Yeah, so taking a look at Shein and Temu, two brands that we track across the US consumer as well as in Europe, there was really robust growth. As we all know, there was a ton of talk over the last couple of years about these two companies threatening US-based retailers. And after the tariff announcement, we saw a notable uptick for a few days after, potentially indicating that consumers were sort of loading up on what they had already been used to purchasing from these two retailers. And then growth collapsed. I mean, you saw growth rates in Temu, for example, of about 50% year over year. They quickly moved to flat, and then they have kept decelerating. And these companies are now experiencing, very, very negative year-over-year growth, and it really hasn't shown any signs of subsiding. And you saw a real magnification of this after the de minimis exemption was fully removed. And even with the reduction in that rate, it was still high enough to cause for example, Shein to announce price increases, and consumers, started balking and looking elsewhere. And that's what we're going to cover in the next slide. So just showing these different spots and what impacted those growth rates. So now we're going to dive into a very specific analysis. This is what I was referring to earlier that got picked up by CNN, where we are able to, in our data, create custom cohorts of people, not only by demographics and geographic location, but by their behavior, to try to tease out exactly where customers are going once they stop shopping at particular merchants. So what we did in this particular analysis is look at people that made at least 2 transactions at Temu or Shein in the first couple months of the year and then stopped. And we're able to see how did that specific group of people behave at a whole host of brands across retail. So what we did was we saw how year-over-year growth evolved in the couple weeks after the de minimis exemption really went away, and growth really started to come down for Temu and Shein. And we compared that to overall growth of these brands. And where we really saw outsized growth was in areas that offered alternatives to what these 2 companies offer. So think about resale, right? So brands like The Real or Savers Value Village. And in addition to that, you saw fast fashion companies like ASOS benefit, Zara benefit. You even saw something like Nuuly, which is owned by Urban Outfitters, which we think may have to do with the fact that even though, a subscription service may not be cheap, it does offer a wide-ranging wardrobe without having to spend a ton of money on each piece. Similarly, we saw department stores, which at first was surprising, but when you take a step back, something like Kohl's has a very wide selection of product types, a very wide selection of brands, and really offered a nice alternative to these 2 companies. Next slide. And then just fast forwarding to today, we heard from Walmart's CEO recently that they may have to start raising prices given these increased costs. We've heard different things from Target and Home Depot and Lowe's. So what we're doing here is tracking what prices people are paying for consumer packaged goods at Walmart and Target. So let's just turn to that last slide. And we're actually seeing in this latest week of data that we have here through May 25th, you saw an uptick in this basket of goods at Walmart and Target. So it already looks like there is an increase in costs. And this has profound implications for what discretionary spending can look like, not just at Walmart and Target, but across the retail landscape. And with that, I will wrap up and thank you everyone for joining. Come see us at the Growth Show. Really looking forward to it at the end of June.
Great. Thanks so much, Michael. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started with our panelists. Thanks again, everyone, for being here. Matt, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to the rest of our audience?
Thanks, Tracy. My name is Matt Krieger. I lead our entire digital commerce analytics and data here at Buffalo Games and subsidiaries.
Great. AJ, why don't we go ahead and start with you next?
Yeah, my name is AJ Patel. I work as the SVP of Growth for UBeauty. We're a luxury skincare brand.
Awesome. And then Sucharita, Michael, I know we met you, but if you guys don't mind, go ahead and reintroduce yourself.
I'm Sucharita with Forrester.
Hi, Michael Gunther from Consumer Edge.
Okay, great. We had some questions from our audience members during your guys' presentations. I want to go ahead and, if we can, we'll hold those questions to the end of the panel. And then what we can do is just go right into our panel questions. So a couple questions. How are you guys rethinking any sourcing strategies in response to current and potential tariff hikes? Just given what's going on with all the different regions, are you able to shift into different geographies? Are you able to move out of, for instance, China? Are you also renegotiating contracts and or diversifying supply chain?
AJ, you want to go first?
Go ahead, Matt.
I think we talked a little bit before, but I think everything is on the table right now, given the situation. But I think a lot of vendors are getting creative. One thing that is challenging, and that's going back to 2016, obviously, when we first experienced some of this stuff. But the tricky part is you want to look somewhere else, but it doesn't happen overnight, especially in the complexities of the products that we're talking about. And then if you do find partners, some of them are already at capacity in certain areas, just because the scalability is hard to just change on a blink. So I think it's interesting, but all things are on the table. Negotiations with our current suppliers, with any vendor's current suppliers, are also there because they know they're in it for the long run too, and they want that business long term. So it's all up on the table right now.
Yeah, I think echoing that statement there, diversifying sourcing is definitely something that the team's looking into. Also looking at the tail, so SKU rationalization. Making sure that we're focused on our hero products is really important during this time too.
In terms of, are you doubling down in your hero products? How does that mean for forecast inventory adjustments?
Yeah, definitely. I think we're doubling down on the focus on our core SKUs. We're also looking at opportunities, to maybe get rid of some SKUs which are underperforming and maybe tail SKUs which we don't necessarily sell a ton of product for.
Got it. And you guys both mentioned margins and how you're able to improve deliverability or your speed and going to market. Do you have any, in light of everything, do you have any operational changes that are creating new efficiencies or just allowing teams to be able to work more nimbly?
I think from a supply chain point of view, I think there are mitigation tactics that teams can look to potentially maybe reduce costs in transit, whether that's using a warehouse on the East Coast versus the West Coast, or, other areas of the supply chain that honestly operations departments are much smarter than I am and strategic on it. But there's definitely are very good ways to change the way from an operational and supply chain. From a manufacturing point of view, I would say I think most vendors are very careful about maintaining consumer trust and not trying to cut out certain manufacturing processes to maybe reduce the quality or anything like that. I think everyone wants to really try and find ways to maintain quality, price, et cetera, and ensure that we're still delivering a great product to the consumer. So I don't want to say or heard that anything is trying to reduce the manufacturing cycle to reduce costs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I do think also though, product reengineering is something that the team's also been, definitely looking into and redesigning products to use kind of alternative, lower kind of tariff impacted materials. And then, definitely one other thing which is really important for us is cost management. So, making sure that we have a really strong demand forecast, having a little bit leaner inventory to minimize kind of the carrying costs.
Got it. Separately, when we had our calls leading up to this webinar, I think we also talked about just pricing, different modeling, how you're internally discussing like what those pricing exercise would look like. Or how are you guys thinking about adjusting those pricing and into promotional strategies just to stay competitive while also not alienating customers? Have you guys had discussions? Is it already showing in your promotional strategies to date?
Hey, do you want to take that one first?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to take that. Yeah, for us, obviously, we're a luxury and more premium brand, so we're a little less flexible or price elastic versus mass beauty. So some things that we're looking to do is really lean into kind of our loyalty program and also utilize smart bundling as a tactic to really drive kind of sales and promotion without being promotional.
Yeah, I think it's depending on channel, absolutely. And I think Sucharita and I were talking about this too, but I don't think we've necessarily quite seen the pricing impacts in the market, given the amount of inventory that some vendors may or may not have in the country. So I think we're a little bit early, but we're definitely seeing people game planning different pricing scenarios. I think working with some third-party partners that can help run price elasticity demands, et cetera, to preview that. So when you're ready to change, if you have to change, you are making the most informed decision at that possible moment. So I think that's the best thing we can do right now.
And Matt, you also mentioned testing some creative options with shipping thresholds, and I really liked that when we were talking separately and leading up to this webinar today. Could you give examples of what you guys were thinking of?
Yeah, I think, and I'd be curious to hear AJ's thoughts on this too, but I think we've lived in a world of free shipping for so long, and certain retailers have emphasized that more than others. But you're starting to see a shift probably within the last year to 18 months where certain vendors in certain categories have changed from no free shipping to maybe a little bit of dollars to cover the shipping, or maybe full shipping coverage. If you haven't done that yet, I'm not necessarily recommending it without informed decision making and data analytics, but I would say that is a threshold that maybe, although not a tariff related charge, if that's incorporated in your margin model today, that may be something you could consider as a slight transparent way of communicating our cost that will impact the overall bottom line in one form or another. So that's kind of the idea behind something like that.
Great. And just a quick question as far as communicating cost-driven changes. We mentioned, with shipping and product pricing. Do you see, and it's a loaded question, but do you see this impacting customers, eroding brand trust? Again, maybe it's too early, but are you leaning into any sort of value strategies? Or AJ, you said you don't really want to be too promotional, but are you able to speak into your advertising or performance ads, speak to price, or is it affecting any creative in any way? So there's a value perception behind that.
Yeah, I think there's definitely some changes that we've made with our messaging. For example, we talked about shipping a couple of seconds ago, but we kind of have messaging which is highlighting that the shipping increase is kind of tied towards an environmental impact potentially, right? So to reduce environmental impact and optimize delivery, we're encouraging consolidated orders, right? So free shipping remains on X dollar orders is a great message kind of to present to a consumer. And then also like framing enhancements to the service, right? So kind of sharing to the consumer, investing in faster, more reliable shipping. And so updated shipping rates reflect this improvement. Really being transparent about it, and actually, obviously, enacting some of those changes too is really important.
Right.
In terms of kind of product specifically, if there's specific improvements that we're making with formula packaging or sustainability practice, really highlighting those to highlight or justifying any kind of price increase is a really good strategy too.
Right. And I think you also mentioned, AJ, that you guys are, because you have a subscription in beauty, that you guys will, if a customer subscribes to a certain SKU, at the time that they subscribe, the price that they're subscribing to, you honor that price. And so there may be an uptick that you're seeing because customers are reacting to a lower price now where they may anticipate a higher price later. I certainly have bought some items myself a month and a half ago where we thought that the tariff changes were going to come sooner, that sort of that doom spending that Sucharita had also highlighted. Do you see that there is some behavior, or there is an uptick, especially in the more on the loyalty side and subscription side, to your consumers to date, in how you're messaging that? Is there an advantage in that?
Yeah, I definitely think that kind of messaging around subscription and fixed pricing and getting in early is valuable, and we've definitely seen kind of benefits by promoting that type of messaging on our website and through communication channels.
And maybe that's a broader question. Also, Matt, are you seeing shifts in customer behavior as these pricing and tariff fluctuations emerge? How are you guys responding to those trends?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit from what we've seen and what I've talked to others. I think it's a little bit too early quite yet. I think some categories are indicating one way or the other, and some are still in a wait and hold period. The other piece that we aren't quite certain yet that's impacting demand is changes in advertising spend. And I think we can't tell if, to maintain inventory balances, are we seeing shifts one way or the other because of the reduction in spend or increased in spend, depending on where you're coming from. We just don't know if that's tariff related, or is it just create paid spend dropping, and that's what's driving the demand down and just consumer interest shifting. So it's a little bit in flux right now at the period we're at.
Got it. Yeah, I'm glad that you brought up the performance side. As far as with some brands and retailers potentially holding back on budget, are you guys seeing any opportunities where you can double down or be competitive, especially on the advertising front or performance side?
AJ?
Yeah, definitely. We're seeing an opportunity with CPMs, in particular on like paid social channels, where advertisers are pulling back a little bit, and so we've been able to kind of increase our share of voice during those periods of time. I would say more recently, it's kind of rebounded back to the original levels, but definitely during announcements and periods of uncertainty, we definitely see pullback from a lot of advertisers.
I wanted to go back to what you guys said earlier about where we were talking about price categories and sort of increases based on the shift in consumer behavior. Sucharita had pointed out that there is some forward buying in categories where the price increases are anticipated in some categories, like say automotive. In either of your guys' businesses, do you see, as we look forward into say, back to school, I know it's only June and school may have just ended, but in some of these seasonal, seasonal buying periods, knowing that July, because of Prime Day, is an uptick for some categories, are you guys anticipating some of those fluctuations as well?
I think definitely. Luxury is definitely a little bit more insulated versus other products. But I think that for sure we're expecting a huge increase on Prime Day this year. I think for a brand that doesn't discount a ton, we are seeing increases during those tentpole moments when we do offer a promotion, or value-based messaging. So I think that the consumer is definitely responding better to value-based messaging and promotion. And so Prime Day, I would expect to be really big.
I would echo what AJ is saying. And I think in certain categories, especially in higher ASP categories, for the most part, larger furniture items, I think we're seeing some changes in timing of spend. And I think in some of those more lower seasonal price points, I think we're going to see a much larger I think most vendors, and we particularly, forecasted some lower ASP items to be bigger than they were last year. And I think that's even going to be exponentially compounded on top of that. So now whether brands have full inventory to support those, given, the kind of backup that we all kind of are aware of what happening with the situation of freight, to be determined, I think, at this point.
Got it. Thanks for those answers. And then I want to touch on this because we did talk about how there are some unexpected, I wouldn't say wins, but opportunities, certainly on the performance side, or where CPMs may be giving you guys some opportunity to double down. What other areas outside of performance spend are there those potential unexpected wins, or at least you're being forced to adapt? When looking back, is there a way that you can also look forward with that planning?
I think I think I made a joke when we were preparing for this that I'm not sure I would use win at all in any of these scenarios respectfully, but if we can think about an opportunity from this, I think less if we talk excluding product, engineering changes or manufacturing supply chains. Like I think from a human resource point of view, we're definitely open to changing how we work. We talked about creative emergence and using AI for certain pieces and stuff and certain aspects like that, like becoming more efficient. And, margin can be protected in many ways. It doesn't always have to be just on COGS. And so I think when you can find ways to generate content or generate efficiencies within your human resources respectfully, I think you take those opportunities to learn. And we've seen successes that I think maybe people have been a little bit hesitant to test in the past. And when times are challenged, you find opportunities, and those are the times where you can embrace those new ways of working. And I think we've seen some opportunities in that way.
Great. Okay, well, we are almost at that 5-minute mark, or just passing it. I want to go ahead and go back to an audience member question that had occurred during, Michael, your presentation. This came from Catherine Sylvester, the CMO at Havenly Brands, and she had asked, what about home furniture decor? Do you see an impact or similar impact than as travel and apparel? And I believe this is when you were mentioning in your slides, Michael, which categories have seen those fluctuations. So I know that we're quickly changing, heads and our hats, but if you can answer that question in the last remaining minutes, appreciate that.
Absolutely. The answer is yes. We've seen several points of deceleration in spending growth since early April until now. So certainly the lowest levels of year-over-year growth of the year in home furnishings. Obviously, there's a lot of other stuff that's impacting home furnishings, with housing market dynamics and high interest, mortgage rates and things like that have been pressuring that space for a while. At the same time, we are seeing average ticket prices starting to move up over the last week or two. So it looks like cost increases might be starting to come through a little bit. One interesting dynamic, though, as we've been analyzing home furnishings and home improvement for a while, but particularly in the home furnishing space, the relative winners have been on the decor side. So brands that are really focused on those lower ticket items versus merchants that are more focused on furniture. Outside of the more discount furniture types, the ones that are, selling things that supplement a home rather than really fully furnish it have been performing better overall.
Great. Thanks for answering that, Michael. Well, I want to thank everyone again for being available today. Thank you, Sucharita, for your presentation and your findings. Thank you, Michael, and our sponsor, Consumer Edge. Also, check us out at The Growth Show. AJ, thank you so much for your feedback and insights, as well as you, Matt Krieger. I really appreciate everybody. Again, if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. This will be available to everyone the next day. And then also check us out on YouTube. So thanks, everyone. I really appreciate it.